So my name is Eric Trollin. I'm a technical solution architect at the on the Umbrella go-to-market team, and I'm joined by Aaron Royhan as a TME on the SD-WAN team. And we're here today to talk to you about the integration between Umbrella and Viptela, and then talk a little bit about the Umbrella solution itself, things that are tied to the integration that could be pretty exciting for you, because I think a lot of folks don't know some of the things that we do on that product today. So just to set some of the context then, before I do get started, the transition that we see for customers today is, all towards a cloud-based security solution. We see a lot of the customers, headed that way. It's just easier for them. But I did want to make sure that, in the context of today, that we're very clear that we're talking about us sort of presenting this and pushing for customers for a cloud security first model. However, we still, of course, have the on-prem solution, right? So there are going to be some use cases where customers don't want to go toward this cloud, or they have something that's going to drive them to something on-prem. Here are a couple of justifications for why that is. So that's still around. It's just not part of our conversation today because it doesn't really, pertain to the Umbrella cloud solution. So what is the Umbrella cloud solution sort of in the simple nutshell, right? So these are all to tee us up towards us hopping into the interface and seeing what that looks like. The idea between the two solutions is that you can automate the tunnels, right? Get the connection up very quickly. So connect quickly and secure your environment very quickly. When you do that and you use the cloud-based solutions, you're going to be able to provide top-notch protection using the cloud-based solution. We've actually got some third-party studies done to validate that we actually are one of the, if not the best cloud solution out there from a security efficacy standpoint. So we can talk about that if you guys are curious. We've published a bunch of white papers on that. So, and again, this was, part of the whole Cisco Live announcements, right? There were a couple of things, right? We came out very strong from a Cisco perspective with our SASE story about how we're tying together. There are a couple of components here. And we also came out with our SecureX solution, which is, going live, I think it's tomorrow, actually. And so we're going to just hone it again on the Umbrella-based solution. Then we'll see what that interface looks like from a how to onboard tunnels perspective inside of the Viptela software. So what does that integration look like? Well, what we're going to see is basically, a customer can, decide to purchase a Viptela solution, and if they use the DNP package, they're going to be able to automate the provisioning of the Umbrella dashboard. It's going to get deposited into their smart account. They're going to be able to click a button, pull down some API keys, use a template, and then push that. They use that template to push out tunnels to all of their devices, thousands of devices throughout the world. They're not going to have to worry and pick which data center is the closest data center. We're going to do that for them, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then the high availability, as far as like, if this data center fails, or for some reason there's an outage, or we're doing some maintenance, where's your backup data center? All of that's going to get taken care of as well. So again, the idea, the tunnels get deployed and is very easy for the customer to do. So when we talk about the failover that I just briefly mentioned, I just did want to make sure that I take some time to slow it down a bit and then talk about what does that really mean? Because there's some things that we want to make sure that we understand the interplay between the high availability on the Umbrella side and then the redundancy that's built into the Viptela templates on the vManage side. So when a customer uses the template to create tunnels on the Viptela device inside of vManage, when they create the tunnels and they push the template out on all of the branch devices that they push that out to, as those tunnels get brought up, they're going to issue a DNS query to global A, and if they've selected a secondary interface, then global B. And so they issue that query, it's going to come to our Umbrella resolvers. And when we see that query, we're going to look at the address that it's come from. And then we're actually going to look at the AS path. And then based on the AS best path, we're going to choose for them the closest data center. And so in the examples that I have coming up, we were looking at a customer who had been auto-selected for the closest data center in LA. And as a consequence, once they get selected for the nearest data center being in LA, which is our group A, they automatically, if they select a secondary interface for an additional redundant connection through global B, they'll select Palo Alto, right? And so this is from our help docs. If you see, it's in the center of the page. So US1, global A and B are within the same region. So we have inter-region failover that's automated as part of the tunnel provisioning. We have a tertiary failover in the central United States in Dallas in case something's going on with the West Coast. So that's also built in, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So these, again, are built into the code on the Viptela software as the tunnels themselves come up. And they don't have to worry about it. So one of the things that how I talk about how we have a highly available network for customers is for those two IP addresses that I talked about, right? So this is kind of a concept of Anycast. And if you're not familiar with it, which is why it's here, it's this notion that you'll have a subnet, a /24. In this case, Palo Alto is the .66 in that third octet, and the .67 is the LA in that third octet. And so for one reason or another, if either of these data centers fail or go out of rotation for maintenance, we're going to be able to use the /23 or sort of this greater subnet and Anycast to be able to fill over to an additional data center. So if LA goes away, but a customer has had only a single circuit, created a single tunnel, that address space will then be available through our Palo Alto data center. So it is relying upon BGP conversion times. So your ISP may vary, but we see that to be about a minute or less. And that's, again, if a customer has a single circuit and they're relying upon Umbrella to do this Anycast. We have some secret sauce in the back end to make sure we're taking care of failover within a data center or intra data center. So customers aren't going to notice that at all. It's going to be immediate. And if there's, for some reason, they have two circuits and they're not relying on our Anycast, what we see is that between the dead peer detection, that takes about 30 seconds to failover between data centers. So from a tunnel capacity failover, right, this is, again, that example that I had just talked about. And now we got a little bit of graphics. So we'll talk and make sure that I cover the idea that the tunnels themselves, there are 250 megs in each direction out of the gate. So that's using IMEX that we did that testing for. So customers may actually get a bit better performance as a default out of the gate. We are able to support 500 megs and greater, but right now we're only giving customers 500 megs on request. And that's just to make sure from a resourcing standpoint that based on where the customer is and what they're going to utilize, that we have capacity inside of the data center. We're continually building out our data centers. We have 32 of them today. COVID has slowed us down a little bit, but we are, progressing on. So we just want to make sure we manage that closely so customers have an excellent experience. And we're continuing to develop that capacity, that tunnel capacity, all the data centers. Yes, go for it.
So your various data centers, we can lock those in as far as making sure that they don't go outside national borders, that sort of stuff.
You can if you don't use the template. So inside of the template, you don't have control over which data center you're going to be tied to. I put that in as an additional feature request because I knew there'd be some customers, like if you were in Germany, for example, you want to make sure 100% that you're within some of the data centers that are GDPR compliant. That's something that's coming, but it's not in the interface today. So you wouldn't be able to use this template that I talked about. Okay,
but it's definitely in the consideration for sure.
Yes, for sure.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. Thank you.
And then just because I also mentioned that you wouldn't have to use that template, one of the other things I want to make sure I capture is you can use multiple tunnels. So if you need, say, for example, a gigabit of throughput to the LA data center, inside of Viptela, that's not supported today, but that is also coming. But if you had other routing platforms, we do support that. So that's not an umbrella limitation. We can support many tunnels to the same data center for customers interested. So from a failover standpoint, right, I think that's pretty straightforward, but I'll revisit again because I want to lay the foundation, right? So we have failover on the umbrella side, which I described, is if a customer configures a primary and a secondary tunnel, and the first tunnel goes away, the tunnel on the second is always going to be available. One thing I also do want to note that is if they only had that primary tunnel configured, again, that primary tunnel address space becomes available in the secondary data center. And this is something to be aware of because then if a tunnel fails over from an umbrella perspective or Viptela perspective, because they have two tunnels there as well, there will be a blip because when the first tunnel goes down, the .67, the second tunnel comes up if you configure the secondary interface on Viptela very quickly. But then probably within a minute, as I've mentioned, the primary tunnel address space becomes available in the secondary data center. So on the Viptela side, there'll be another blip back to that primary tunnel interface, but it'll actually be up in our secondary data center. So the idea here is that if customers, if you want to fill it very quickly, they can code two tunnels on the Viptela side. They want to trust Umbrella to take care of that stuff. They don't really need to do that. They can just have the primary tunnel configured and then fail over and use our Anycast as a failover mechanism. So this is kind of that control that if a customer really wants a small address window and they don't like the idea of like a minute being too long for the internet service, then they'll have a little bit more control to rely on dead peer detection and fill over more quickly. And again, the tertiary failover that I had mentioned here. So nothing too fancy as far as, the failover and detecting that the tunnels are down. We're using IKE dead peer detection. So again, if there's no response, we're going to be able to fail over on that. So I thought this would be kind of a nice last slide for us to make sure we kind of level set, because we're going to hop into the interface. And I often get questions in the secure internet gateway. We have a couple of areas of protection and control that we can utilize, right? So one of them is the DNS layered security. That was what traditionally used to be the only thing that we sold inside of Umbrella, is that DNS-based protection. Now, as a secure internet gateway, you get that DNS layer protection, but you also get our cloud-delivered firewall and our secure web gateway, right? So understanding that the protections go through, that it first checks the DNS layered security. That's when we create a policy where you're thinking about securing things. The DNS is always the thing that checks first. And the second thing that gets checked next is the cloud-delivered firewall. And then the last piece is that secure web gateway for those particular use cases. So as we look through the interface today, just make sure that you kind of set in your mind, like, oh, okay, if we're looking at SWG policy, we've already gone through a DNS layer check to make sure that that has been secured.
Can I ask you a quick question, Eric?
Sure.
So now that we're using the secure internet gateway through Umbrella for our branch security in our SD-WAN, what do I do as far as what's the nature of the integration or the augmentation with the onboard next-gen firewall features that you guys have been working on? Is there really an integration? Is there a separation of duties? How does that work?
I would just want to make sure you broke up a little bit on that question, so I'm going to restate it, make sure I understood. What does that look like from a next generation cloud delivered firewall, and how does that interoperate with the DNS layered security? Is that accurate?
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. Because that is one of the compelling stories, is that it really is integrated. I don't have to put in a branch firewall in front of every branch SD-WAN router.
Yep.
And then the secure internet gateway is obviously very compelling.
Yeah, exactly. And so for us, what we see is this idea of the DNS layer. So the DNS layered solution is still, again, a full-fledged solution for a lot of customers. But then there are customers, who are very interested in making sure that, all right, as I'm going through my branch refresh, or I just want to simplify my security stack, I don't really want. I've had financial customers that have next generation firewalls on-prem and also secure web gateways on-prem. And so moving that towards the cloud, centralizing the management of that is really key to them. So for us in the cloud delivered firewall component, right? So today that cloud delivered firewall is layer 3, layer 4, and we have layer 7 capabilities for application filtering as well in the cloud. Really, when I hear the words next generation firewall, that requires really, in my mind, that the IPS signature capabilities, which we're actually developing today, but I'm not able to show you inside of the interface. So that is coming. We expect that at some point in this year. We're just putting the finishing touches at the layer 7 capabilities. And once we have IPS, that really kind of puts us in the whole next generation firewall feature set. We do expect, intend to use some components of that next generation IPS capabilities to be Snort 3.0, as well as some other engines. But we did make an intentional choice to not basically do a lift and shift like other competitors have done, which is take our next generation firepower solution and then plop it into the cloud and call it good. That's not what we're doing. We're actually redeveloping that from scratch. So it's taking us a little bit longer, but sometimes, sweet things are worth waiting for.
But ultimately, it sounds like the roadmap is a completely cloud-delivered branch security solution.
That is the intent, yes.
One thing real quick, if I could just interject here, and I think this was, Eric already kind of attested to this, but it's not an either or solution. So there is, there are components within the ISR that you can take advantage of, IDS, IPS, zone-based firewall and things like that. So there are customers out there that will utilize onboard capabilities for things like intra-zone filtering or inter-zone filtering and things like that, and really utilize the Umbrella service for more internet-bound traffic where you want maybe that rich dashboard that Umbrella is going to provide. So it doesn't have to be an either or, it can be an and, I guess is what I was trying to say earlier. So you can utilize both security capabilities. They will work together.
That's a good point, Aaron. I think you'll have to keep me in check on that too, just to make sure, because I often talk about as far as the things, when I answer the questions, I'm really thinking about exactly what we're doing in the cloud delivered firewall team, or sorry, the cloud security team. So definitely, yeah, always the customer and what their asks are really paramount when we're talking about these solutions. I'm so used to working with routers for so long. It's just something that's kind of I forget to talk about. So apologies about that. All right, so I'm going to pop into the demo, and then we can start to talk through what that interface looks like and show you some features that could be of interest to you. And I'm going to just briefly go through the templates themselves and just see what that looks like. So if you're not familiar with it, once you log in, right, everything's tied to a template. I'm going to just use a vEdge device as a talking point. And the first step that we're going to do is we're going to go in, we're going to create our SIG credentials. And I talked about if a customer did a DNAP purchase, they would be able to do this thing where the Umbrella dashboard and the vManage dashboard get tied together. And if I'd done this inside of this environment, so this is before we had it integrated in our lab, you could click on the get keys. And so what that does for a customer is that pulls down the software key itself and the secret, as well as their organization ID. So without that DNAP integration, they have to enter these 3 components on their own. We can see what that looks like as we go through the rest of the template, but I just want to make sure like that's what you get from that automated onboarding component. But you still can type in those 3 fields by yourself and be able to get the full, auto tunnel provisioning, right? That was just the automated onboarding that I was talking about. And then inside, if I'm going to use the template, that's going to auto pick the data centers for me. That's going to be the secure internet gateway template. If I have to hard code those because there's some concerns. The VPN IPsec template is something that I had mentioned earlier that you would use. So pretty simply, right? All we have to do from a customer standpoint is make sure that we're picking the correct IPsec tunnel, and if we're going to pick an interface, that will tie it to that. And this is where the data center A and data center B come in. We're just going to pick the primary. If there was, for some reason, that you had something inside of your environment where you had to do some custom configurations, that's where you would use that advanced options. So you could go in and change some of the defaults. And if you're curious about what all the defaults are that are supported, we also have that logged onto captured on our docs.umbrella.com website. So once I click add, it's as simple as that, right? So then I've created the IPsec tunnel interfaces. I can go ahead and click another. And if I set this as 2, I can set this as primary or secondary. No, I can also set it as primary. So, the idea here might be that if a customer has 2 circuits and they're diverse according to their ISPs, but they really like the idea of perhaps using the LA data centers to carry through with my example, they can still have 2 tunnels that are up and connected to those data centers. Only one of these is going to be active per the template, and the other one will be the backup. So now they're going to get the fastest data center, and then they're going to also be protected from their ISP redundancy. So if I click to go ahead and save, that's really all there is as far as creating the templates themselves. The next step that I would have to do is actually tie it to a device and then push that out. So I'm going to click cancel here, and I'm going to go and look at the device that I've got. Oh. Hold on. All right, so I've pushed it out to these devices. Still not coming in there. Oh. All right, let's see. We go in and we look at this. The last step that we would do is tie these in for this particular device using these templates. So I could scroll down here. And my SIG credentials that have already been entered in my lab. So that was once I created and saved that SIG template has been done. And then I would go ahead and I would select also the secure internet gateway SIG auto tunnel capability. The last step is I would create a service route to make sure that it uses that tunnel. And once I push those capabilities out, the tunnels themselves come up, and that's where that DNS discovery happens. And then we would actually get tied to a specific data center. So once I push that out, what I see on this side is I would go to the tunnel underneath the Umbrella dashboard. And what I see here is that both these tunnels have already been configured and then been brought up. And so our naming is, based on for the tunnel interfaces, it's a little bit different from vEdge or cEdge, but the idea here is that it's the IP address and also the site address that it's been tied to. And if I was curious as to what data center was being used, I had to click into that. This is the actual identity that each tunnel gets. It's unique per tunnel, and it's tied to the Palo Alto data center. And that's the IP address that we see it coming from. So once the tunnel's inside of the interface, we have a couple of things that we do. So I won't go through a full tour based on the time that I've got inside of the Umbrella interface, but the tunnel basically becomes what we call one of the identities, right? So we have this capability of pulling a user identity through SAML authentication, through Active Directory, through mobile devices such as iPads and iPhones, roaming computers. So we have an agent that you can install on the laptop, and networks. So we can also enter those addresses where everyone comes onto the internet, sync your internet facing or your NAT address. And with the tunnel, once it comes on, we know what the tunnel itself looks like, but we can go ahead and go in and define some internal networks. So if you have some of your branches and you've carved it up so that they all have 192.168, and each one of them has a unique address space here, and you want them to inherit a different policy over the tunnel, say that you've also subnetted that a little bit more deeply for your guest users versus your internal users. If you're sending that all over the same tunnel, you could go in here underneath the internal networks and then go ahead and click Add. Then you would tie this to the tunnel itself. And this is pretty straightforward. So why is this important? Because now the tunnel itself exists, but if you want to create some delineation between all the traffic coming over the tunnel and have it inherit a different policy, as opposed to just a subset of it, you would need to go through this additional step. So now once we create some of those identities, let's just briefly look at what the policies themselves look like. And so I had called this out in the slide, and I'll call it again in the interface. So today what our policy engine looks like is we've got DNS policies, firewall-based policies, and our web-based policy. And then underneath here, if we're just creating policy components, then we want to tie them to specific policies, or we just want to access them directly, we can go in here and say, for example, if I was creating something called tenant-based controls, which is this capability where we have some customers who are Office 365 customers, but they only want users when they're on site to be able to access the corporate Office 365. And that's what tenant-based controls is all about. And so that's kind of a feature that we've added in the past month or two. I can just show you what it looks like. We support also Google and Slack. Box and Dropbox are coming by the end of this year. But again, this is something that a lot of customers have asked for this as part of the capabilities. It's what we do inside of Umbrella. So it's obviously not just DNS anymore. I just want to make sure I highlighted that component. So in the interest of time, because I think probably a lot of the folks are familiar with their DNS-based policies, I will focus on just the web-based policies. And one of the ways that I'll do that is I'll go into here and I'm just going to pull up one of the existing policies so we can kind of talk through. I've talked about, you connect your branch sites to us with tunnels when you're using the Secure Internet Gateway. And if we're going to create a policy, there's a whole wizard that steps us through it. I'm going to pick an existing policy and a web policy just for a branch site. And if we wanted to see what policy this is tied to and how this could be interesting is I talked about those previous capabilities. And if you saw, I had a couple of tunnels that were inside there, right? These are the ones that I've generated through Viptela. Perhaps these are other tunnels that I've generated through Viptela, but I've renamed them, right? So the name of it's not so important because we have identity in the background. Now, if I want a policy that's going to hit all tunnels, regardless of how many tunnels I create to hit a single policy, I could just select tunnels, right? So now we know that all the branch routers that we bring up, for across 100 sites, they're going to inherit the same policy using this selection within the policy itself. If I just wanted this rule to apply just to the tunnel, let's right-click this little caret and then pick the particular tunnel. And this is the same with all of our policies that we create, right? So if you have, thousands upon thousands of roaming computers and you want them to inherit a policy, you just click the global or sort of the overarching holding container. If you had very specific roaming computers that you wanted to apply this to, there would be a caret. You could drop that down and select those. And that's how you tie the identity itself to a policy. And then we have a couple of capabilities. I talked about the tenant-based controls, things that I want to make sure that I do touch on, right? So we have security settings within the secure web policies. We have security settings inside of the DNS policy. I'll talk about that in just a moment. We have also content capabilities and this directly ties to the Talos WBRS feed. That's where this is coming from our content capabilities inside of the Secure Web Gateway. So it's the same data source as a web security appliance. So it's important to note. They also have application capabilities to be able to do some things like, all right, we've had customers ask and say, hey, I don't want people to be able to post tweets while they're on the stock floor. So I want to be able to limit the ability to post tweets. Can you do that? Yes, of course we can. Same thing with Facebook and Box and things like that. So the thing that I think is most interesting from a web security Cisco integration story is the capabilities that exist inside of our filtering and our sandboxing solution. So our sandbox solution, at Cisco is Threat Grid, right? And so that was through an acquisition. And how we enabled the automation on the back end is pretty cool, because we auto provision customers if they don't have a Threat Grid sandbox. When they basically go and configure the first rule, they're going to toggle this. And I've already selected this so you don't see it, but what happens then, when I would say toggle it, if I've never selected a region before, I'm going to get my choice between North America or Europe. And then based on that, those Threat Grid sandboxes are going to get, or that Threat Grid sandbox is going to get created in the respective country. So the customer gets an email, and if they already have Threat Grid, they just got to send another email saying, hey, can you actually tie this to my Umbrella instance? Here's this new sandbox you created for me. I want my real one. And then we'll take care of that in the back end. So now this whole solution with an automation of bringing on the sandbox is pretty straightforward. And of course, we do that AMP file inspection. So if you turn that on, we're going to do an AMP shell hash lookup and see if it is a known existing file. If it's not a known existing file, we go through the AV scanning of it, and it still looks good, but we're not certain, then it meets that criteria, of a certain file type. We're going to actually send that to the Threat Grid for deeper analysis. Our limitation is a 50 megs in file size. That is a little bit different because Threat Grid itself supports 100 megs. So I just thought I'd call that out. But basically, all the file types that Threat Grid supports, we support. And the ones that it don't, we took that instruction from Threat Grid. So they made the choice to not support those. So again, when I go in here, the idea here is that anytime I want to turn on a feature for a particular policy, I can toggle the box, and it's fairly straightforward. I mentioned, we support tunneling, and that's how customers can send traffic to us. If you think about why a customer might pick tunneling over a proxy pack file, or say, for example, WCCP. So we really kind of look at WCCP as, an old school kind of thing, right? Some customers, that was the only way to get their traffic there. Really, for the next generation, we're thinking IPsec tunnels is the best way to get us the traffic. We do support proxy pack files, of course, because everyone uses them. You can use a proxy pack and come over the tunnel if you want to do that too. So just something to be mindful of. And I'm gonna pop back up here into a policies section, and I'm going to create something from default because I want to be able to talk through things that I think would be interesting. And this is the best way I thought when I was preparing out how to demo it to try to show a customer. So when we're using the Secure Internet Gateway solution, the idea here is that from us, we believe a best practice is, you've got some excellent DNS-based controls. So you go in here, you basically select, all right, I'm going to protect my customers or my end users from the most important protections that Umbrella affords me from the DNS functionality standpoint. And then really when customers are looking at a secure web gateway solution and it doesn't fit for DNS, then we think, all right, after that protection, I'm going to go in and I'm going to do some content filtering and then also some more granular control through SAML groups, for example, if I'm interested in that. So for us, what we see is inside of the DNS-based policies, there are some controls that or protections that we're able to afford from the DNS side that we can't offer on the website. And the reason is because they're fundamentally DNS-based. So nice examples of that are our newly seen domains, our dynamic DNS, potentially harmful domains, and our DNS tunneling capabilities, as well as crypto mining. So if I select DNS policies, all those are still there, of course. But if I select web-based policies, it just drops down to these two. So these categories are controlled by Talos, and the rest of the categories inside of the DNS are really coming from the DNS-based intelligence. So we think those categories are the ones that you can protect from your DNS-based policies, and all the rest of the control from a category standpoint, you should do through your web security appliance. So pretty cool from a capability standpoint as far as what the functionality is involved. And then the rest of the capabilities of the secure web solution are really the same as a lot of the other solutions that are out there, right? So you can do web filtering by user, by group, different kinds of groups, different ways that you can come to us, and we'll control that. Granular control through application, through AD, if you're interested in doing that. We also have the capability to do selective decryption by apps. We also can, of course, do application-based controls, which I glossed over a little bit, but I'll home back now because I've got just a few minutes. So if you wanted to look at Facebook, for example, here's the capability that I was talking about where you can block posts and shares. Perhaps you just want to be able to block it, or perhaps you have a policy where this is the only thing that you want to allow inside of your environment. And of course, we do support that. Last thing I think is worthwhile to show customers, right? So the Umbrella Secure Internet solution has come first and foremost from the Umbrella OpenDNS side, right? And our focus has always been security. And we do that extremely well. We have a great security research team. We have a great partnership with Talos. And one of the things that we've done recently to show customers is, this, what we call the threat report, right? So we do this thing called attribution. So we're not just saying, hey, it's malware, but it's a particular kind of malware, right? And what's interesting to customers. And so this is one of the things that we've revamped after studies about how users are actually using our interface when they come into their overview page and what they actually click on and what they're looking for. So I did just want to highlight the fact that because we are much more focused from a security standpoint, making sure that customers are finding value in our solution and we're able to identify it for them, right? So for example, in here, we're talking about crypto jacking as web crypto miner. If you see that in your environment, you're a security person, you're going to understand what that risk looks like. And if you're not, well, you can double click in here, you'll get a little bit more of a detail. So it's an excellent tool for customers who are looking for a cloud security solution today. And if they are looking to simplify their security and network stack together, both the Umbrella and the VIPTEL together are something that helps with that automation as well as the other security goodness that Cisco has from the security stack standpoint.
Eric, real quick, please forgive me if you already mentioned this at some point and I missed it, but do you see any integration with Umbrella and vManage so that way we really do get that single point to manage the WAN from a security standpoint as well?
Yeah, so that is an ask, right? And again, so Cisco's behind the whole SASE message, right? And we're working together with the VIPTEL BU to basically try to get a better representation inside of the interface. I'm not supposed to talk about futures, right? You guys really want to talk about today, but yes, that's something we are talking about and pushing to get inside of the interface. Oh, cool. I see that as a valuable thing for our customers.
I was going to ask a quick one. For me, as someone who's getting into Cisco SD-WAN and starting to learn it and get a feel for it and things like that, I was wondering with like Umbrella, is there kind of like a good way where you could get kind of hands-on with it and start kind of learning the interface and the different things that it does?
Yeah, so there are two things that I heard you ask, sort of trying to get familiar with, right? There's the new side on the SD-WAN side, and then there's getting familiar with Umbrella itself on just the Umbrella side. So Umbrella offers something called a DNS monitoring solution, which the interface, you're not able to block anything, but you get that deep visibility, and we ascribe threats to the DNS traffic that we see. And that's a great free way to just go in and sign up and use Umbrella, see the interface, see some of the reporting that you get for free for that. We provide it for free because honestly, that DNS traffic helps us to enrich our security protections for our paying customers. And Aaron, I didn't know if you had a solution for the SD-WAN side to get familiar with it, with that integration.
Yeah, so I think probably the where I would direct you, depending on if you're a customer or partner. If you are a partner, you could take a look at something like Cisco dCloud. So within the dCloud dashboard, we have a number of labs that you can take advantage of there to get hands-on experience with not only the vManage dashboard, but other elements that integrate with vManage, now ACI, things like, and even Umbrella for that matter. But yeah, it's from a customer perspective, I would suggest we could even put you in contact with your local account team who can share out a vCloud lab to get you some hands-on experience. If you're not a partner, for instance, that's something that we can help with as well.
Yeah, and we just got a dCloud lab between Viptel and Umbrella that went live today. So you should be able to have your account team share that with you and then kick the tires on that to see what that automation looks like, because I did whip through that.
Yeah, and these are, and just to mention, these are fully functioning labs. It's not like SIM software or something like that. This is an actual vManage with an actual Umbrella dashboard. You can tear it up, do whatever you want with it, and then it just resets at the end of the day, kind of thing. So.